All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our latest webinar from the San Joaquin Valley Regional Early Action Planning Program. Today's webinar is on the sixth cycle housing element, lessons learned and compliance implications. We have a great panel of panelists today joining us, and let me go through a few logistics. I'm Michael Segala, by the way, consultant here in the Fresno area. And let me go through a few items here. One is thank you once again for registering. This is a AICP CM eligible webinar. The course number is on the flyer on the screen. So as part of that process, we'll have a post-webinar evaluation that I'll send out in a couple of days. If you could fill that out and get it back to us, that would be greatly appreciated. This webinar is recorded, and the information that's shared in this webinar, including the recording, will be posted to the San Joaquin Valley REAP webpage in about 2 to 3 days. And webinar is about 1 hour today or less. We'll be taking questions either during the webinar, during the discussion or after. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. You could use the raise hand function, you could use the question and answer function, or you could use the chat function, and I'll be monitoring those along the way and calling you out. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce Robert Phipps, the Fresno Council of Governments Interim Executive Director, and he's our moderator today, and I'll hand it off to you, Robert. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Well, good afternoon, and again, thank you for joining us. We have an esteemed panel today, and we'd like to start off by thanking each one of them for joining us, beginning with Sohab Mahmood with HCD, also Brenna Weatherby and Ryan Lester, Ryan with Mintier Harnish, and Brenna with Rincon Consultants, and rounding out our panel, Steve Esselman with the City of Shafter, which was one of the few jurisdictions that actually met the housing element deadline. As you know, that deadline has passed, and what we're going to talk about today is how Valley jurisdictions on the whole performed. What were some of the best practices that we saw. We are going to talk a little bit about the potential consequences for not being in compliance as the time marches on. What are some of the benefits of being an affirmatively pro-housing, that affirmatively pro-housing designation, and so we'll get to all these questions and hopefully more, but let's kick it off with Sohab from the HCD perspective to kind of give us an overall picture of the submittal and certification rate for Valley jurisdictions. Sohab?
Well, thanks, Robert, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. There we go. You guys see that all right? Cool. Thank you. So yeah, as Robert introduced me, my name is Sohab Mahmood. I'm with HCD within the Housing Policy Division. I'm the Senior Housing Policy Manager. I work on housing elements quite a bit, as well as our statewide technical assistance program. I also work on REAP 2.0. I work on other planning grant programs and pro-housing. So you may have seen me in a lot of different spaces, but today I'm here to talk about what's going on in the Valley in terms of housing elements, timelines, and how we can help you. So the first thing is just kind of an overview of where we're at. So the statutory deadline for the sixth cycle, so meaning the day that the sixth cycle began and your fifth cycle was out of compliance, for San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Fresno, Tulare, and Kern counties was December 2023. And for Kings, Madera, Merced counties, it was January 2024. So this was essentially the day of the sixth cycle beginning, your fifth cycle no longer being in compliance, and starting that process of getting your sixth cycle and housing element compliance. In April/May, because if you are due in December versus if you are due in January, if a housing element is not adopted and found in compliance by HCD within 120 days of the statutory deadline, so that was April, May, basically the last 2 months, any required rezones must be completed within 1 year of your statutory due date. This is basically saying that if you did not have a compliant housing element within 120 days of your due date, which is passed for most jurisdictions in the Valley, then you now only have 1 year to complete any required rezones that you needed to do to meet the RHNA. So typically, if you were found in compliance within that 120 days, you would have up to 3 years to complete your rezones, but in this case, now you only have up to 1 year. December 2024, so end of this year and early next year, January 2025, if a housing element is not found in compliance within 1 year of your statutory deadline, so if you have not gained compliance by this time, by December 2024 or January 2025, you cannot be found in compliance until all required rezones to address your RHNA have been completed. So this is kind of just saying that once that 1 year lapse, if you have not completed your rezones, you can't be found in compliance until those rezones are completed. April, May, if you have not been found in compliance around this time, then your rezones must be completed within 1 year, so towards the end of the year or January 2025, depending on your county. So where are we at right now? What is the Valley looking like? What are the statuses? So there are 8 jurisdictions that have an adopted or a draft housing element that's in compliance. So that's 8 jurisdictions right now. 15 jurisdictions are currently under review with us in the Valley. 16 jurisdictions are out of compliance. And so that means those 16 jurisdictions they submitted, maybe they've already submitted a couple rounds, but they have been found out of compliance. And 31 jurisdictions have yet to submit their housing element. So those 31 jurisdictions is about half of the Valley out of 70. And then the rest are either under review, they're out of compliance, or they are in compliance, they're draft or they're adopted. So the numbers may not look super great, but we do really want to talk about today what are best practices and how to kind of help Valley jurisdictions work through issues that they're having, whether it's trying to submit their housing element or if they're trying to understand their findings and how we can help. But just some key things to know about what happens next or some steps that may happen next. HCD was given greater authority when it comes to housing element compliance. The importance of compliance obviously has gone up quite a bit, and also our authority in enforcing jurisdictions to become compliant has gone up. And so right now we are in the proactive enforcement phase. So we are taking actions to start enforcing some of the requirements, so to help you get into, to bring you into compliance. So jurisdictions who have never submitted a draft at all, those are the 31 that are out of compliance, that did not submit a draft. Housing elements that continue to remain out of compliance. We're looking at jurisdictions who have a rezone timeline that are now out of compliance. That's not so much right now for the Valley because the 120 days just passed. You still have that 1 year if you're in compliance, but need to finish your rezones. The rezone implementation timelines are really falling for SCAG and ABAG jurisdictions that are kind of a year, 2 years, 3 years into the cycle now. And the long-term housing element implementation, that's also something, it's happening more right now in the ABAG, STANDAG, SCAG regions, because again, they're a couple years now. Some of them are almost a couple years into their cycle. So now we're looking at what, based on their long-term commitments that they've made in their programs, how are they doing, what's going on, and making enforcement actions around there. Really for the Valley, the 2 biggest things are going to be the first 2 bullet points, those who have not submitted and those who continue to remain out of compliance. Some things that you will see, you may have already seen by now, as part of this enforcement timeline or process, is technical assistance letters and LOIs. So those are letters of inquiries coming from our office, basically trying to get a sense of what's going on, where are you, getting a scheduled timeline, and working with you to help you meet that timeline. Those LOIs, I think they've already been sent out. If they haven't, they are coming, especially if you are kind of falling into those 2 categories. really it's the first step in us trying to understand where you're at and how we can help you and how we can keep you or help you get on track to gaining a compliant housing element. Some overall consequences of not having housing element compliance, the ineligibility or the delay in receiving state funds for various programs. A lot more funding is associated now with having a compliant housing element, not only funding sources within HCD, but also funding sources at different departments and state agencies like transportation funding. And so if you do not have a compliant housing element, you can have a delay in receiving your funding or not be eligible for that round of funding. Housing Accountability Act is another big piece where your general plan would not be considered valid without a compliant housing element. You can't use it to note any inconsistencies with zoning and general plan if you are denying a project. Builder's remedy is also a big thing that probably you've all heard about in the last couple of years that come into play. There run legal risks when your general plan is invalid. You're vulnerable to litigation, not only from us, but other organizations, housing rights organizations and developers. And at some point, you can incur financial penalties for not having a compliant housing element. But I hope we never get there yet. And that's our goal, is to make sure that we don't get there and try to get you into compliance as soon as possible and work through whatever issues you might be finding right now. A lot of incentives, I'm sure, for having compliant housing element. I guess the incentive is to avoid everything on this slide. But among other things, being able to access funding sources that help you build the housing that you need, getting or being eligible to apply for a pro-housing program, and probably a lot of other programs are just some of the many incentives to having a compliant housing element. There is a lot of technical assistance resources. We have, I believe the Valley also has different groups have to help you gain compliance. The first and foremost is our findings letter. Those are complete sets of findings for your entire review. And the second thing is to having follow-up calls with us, TA calls, to help if you don't understand something in the findings letter, we can explain something, walking through revisions, walking through your edits, your responses to the findings, giving you feedback there in TA calls and meetings. We also have informal reviews that are based on availability, but sometimes you can send certain sections of your housing element. Hey, I've been working on this to try to address the findings. Can we get a sense of, are we on the right track? So there are informal reviews that can be made available based on availability. You have point of contacts for every single county in the San Joaquin Valley. These are assigned people, staff members for your county to be available for TA calls, even if you haven't submitted yet, to brainstorm with you, to help answer questions. We try to keep the point of contacts the same as the assigned reviewers when you submit. Again, that's sometimes based on availability and workload, but we try to keep them the same. So you do have point of contacts. If you have submitted, your assigned reviewer is a resource to you to use to get help on addressing, if you've submitted but you were found out of compliance, to get help on addressing those findings. I will sometimes meet with the same jurisdiction 3 times in a month to get them across that finish line. So your assigned reviewer is somebody, if you've already submitted, is a key person that you can work with. If you haven't submitted and you might be struggling to submit, or you're drafting your document and you're seeing some challenges, you have a point of contact for your county. Let me know, or I can send it out to Robert, and we can give you a list of those people per county with their email addresses so you can access them as well. So there's just some key things we have for technical assistance, but also we're always available to help answer questions, schedule TA calls, work through any issues you might be having. You can directly contact me as well, and I can get you in contact with people you might be looking for, your reviewers, your point of contacts, and things like that. And I'll pass it back to Michael and Robert for the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Soheb. So we do have a question for you already out of the gate from Mark Staples in Taft. If a jurisdiction does not require rezoning, how is the housing element status viewed if it's still not complete in December 2024?
Sure. So you would still be out of compliance, number one. The second thing is by 2024, so you're a year out, we would still be pursuing enforcement action. You're out of compliance. There would be enforcement action. If we haven't already, we will be starting with the letter of inquiries, trying to understand where you're at. If you have a letter of inquiry, you've come up with a schedule with the staff, and you're out of compliance with that schedule now, as a response to that letter of inquiry, we'll progressively continue to take enforcement actions until we get you into compliance, essentially. But hopefully, you know, it's as of December 2024, even if you don't have a rezone, if you're out of compliance. And from there, you'll probably have already gotten a letter of inquiry, a LOI, and you've probably already arranged a schedule with our staff to get you into compliance, and we're just going to be working based off that schedule.
Okay, wonderful. And I'll use this as a opportunity for a shameless plug for the REAP program. You know, we offer through the Valley-wide REAP program technical assistance as well. Most prominently in through, or I should say, for AFFH. We anticipated a lot of AFFH issues, given that this is the first round where that was a requirement, a new requirement for the housing element. And that kind of leads us nicely into our next two speakers, Brenna and Ryan, who together, Rincon and Mintier Harnish have handled, I'm sure, dozens and dozens of housing elements throughout the state, including many in the Valley, and have also worked through the Valley-wide REAP program on technical assistance as well, helping many of our Valley jurisdictions and taking the lead on several of our Valley-wide studies. So what have you seen? What have been the most common issues, Brenna and Ryan? You know, where has your expertise led you?
Okay, well, I can jump in here first if you don't mind, Brenna. So the first point, the biggest point lesson that I learned was to start early and to expect delays. Delays can come from everywhere. It could be council, it could be planning commission, it could be the public. A number of our projects, despite our best efforts, got delayed for things that we couldn't control, and that does it does impact your rezone timing, things like that, if you don't make the deadline. So my advice to everyone is, we tried to start these like 1.5 to 2 years early in the 6th cycle. I might start a little sooner in the next cycle.
Brenna?
Yeah, one thing I would say also, just to add to that, in addition to starting early, another thing that you can start early in addition to the preparation is making sure that your data is all in place. So we have definitely had some holdups at times because the data either wasn't available, it wasn't there had been staff changes that had taken time for staff to find the right information. I understand that things happen, everybody's short-staffed these days, but one thing to keep in mind going forward for the next cycle is to just know that these documents are extremely data heavy. And so the more you can do now to get your data in place, making sure that you're keeping good records on development that is happening, keeping good records on interest that has come in from developers or from parcel owners, all of that makes a difference. So putting those systems in place now will be very helpful leading into the next cycle.
Now, the Valley, there are some key differences. You mentioned staffing shortages, which I know that's been an issue to some degree statewide. And the Valley, on the one hand, has benefited. We were not impacted nearly as much as some other parts of the state with regard to the 6th cycle RHNA numbers. But in other aspects, we have suffered worse, I think, in terms like staffing turnover. For example, our smaller jurisdictions in particular, have a very difficult time meeting the housing element requirements, and especially some of the newer requirements that as we've discussed, AFFH and so forth. Has there been a distinction in your work in the Valley versus other parts of the state? Have you seen specific things in the Valley that are different than issues that you've encountered in other areas of the state?
I mean, I think it's just that some of the jurisdictions are smaller, and so there are fewer staff people to tackle some of these things. And I think experience has shown us that getting through the housing element is only half the battle, right? So next comes implementation, and implementation oftentimes takes more staff than the preparation of the housing element does. So I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news there, but it can be time intensive, depending on what your programs look like. So staffing is just a good thing to think about moving forward. I know consultants are expensive. We know we're expensive, but using consultants to help you, using, maybe community members to help you. But there are some other ways. I think just getting creative if you are short-staffed, knowing that implementation is coming, and it can be time intensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add to that your programs will involve other departments, so get them involved early, have them review the programs, have them give you feedback on them, and work with them because they will be implementing the program.
And we in the Valley, we haven't had, I'm assuming, the issues with the rezoning that I'm assuming that you've seen in other parts of the state as well. That's also been kind of another benefit. I see Sohab shaking her head. Has that aided us? The land has typically not been the problem in the Valley. Is that still holding true?
It is, but I would say it varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions are heavily impacted, just because their RHNA numbers are larger. And then there are other jurisdictions where they do have additional vacant land that they can pull from. So it varies, but for the most part, I think that Valley jurisdictions have benefited from the fact that there is vacant land available.
Yeah, I would say that's been my experience as well. I would just add that in the Valley you have quite a few jurisdictions that use either agricultural preservation or growth management policies, and you do have to navigate those in the housing element process. And that is something that you don't see very often in the Bay Area, where it's a built-out community.
Right. So I'm coming from a very small jurisdiction. I'm late getting out of the gate. I hear you, start early, but quite frankly, it's the train has left the station on that one for me. What do I do now? What's your advice? I'm sorry. I wish I had listened to you sooner. There have been other webinars on this issue, I know, but I'm kind of by myself. I don't have a lot of resources for consultants. Can you help me out, please?
I mean, I think Brian can weigh in also, but I think as consultants, we're always here to help. If you're late though, I think you're probably in a situation where you're going to need to engage the help of consultants that have done this and can navigate the process with you and show you places where you can potentially speed things up a little bit. Consultants also have the relationship with members of HCD like Sohab that we can call, we can talk to, and they can help us navigate it as well. So going it alone without having those relationships can be difficult. So I think that would be the first step, is to find a consultant that you trust, engage them, and that they are here to help and help you through the process.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then I would just add, don't be afraid of HCD. Contact them. They have technical assistance. They'll respond when they can, and you can ask questions. Informal review is great. You can, ask if they have capacity to review your, even a section, just, the first section you draft, whatever it may be. Build a relationship with whoever from HCD is assigned to your county.
Yeah, I would, oh, sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Go ahead, Soha.
I was just gonna say, I would add to exactly to what Ryan said, and Brenna, if you're a smaller jurisdiction, I mean, if you're any jurisdiction, you can still call us, but you know what, to Robert's scenario, if you're a smaller jurisdiction, if you have something drafted, you're late, you have something in the works, you have not submitted, engage us now. Just like Brenna and Ryan said, call us now, email us now, set up a call to go over what you might already have, a schedule, and maybe even if you have a list of questions. Hey, this is what we're thinking. This is what we're working through. This is what we're struggling with. We can workshop a lot of these things over calls with you. Do it now, engage us now, as much as you can. Maybe some of that TA with us can help you get through the process sooner, to get you to submit sooner, and to once you've submitted, there's an existing relationship. We know what we're looking at. Maybe we can even assign point of contact. I mean, you already have point of contacts, but you can have that will help the reviewer if they get assigned to you when you submit, a little bit more in the process because of the familiarity. So if you have not submitted, but you have something in the works, do not hesitate to engage us. Give us a quick email, ask for a call. We can set it up. Bring a list of questions if you have any, a schedule, what you're working towards, what ideas you have, and we can work through all that with you.
Yeah, Michael, did you have?
Oh, yeah, Soha. So, okay, so of the 15 jurisdictions under review, then you have 16 jurisdictions out. Does out mean that they submitted, it was reviewed, and they were found to be out of compliance? And if that's the case, what was the major theme of those 16 jurisdictions that are out of compliance?
Yeah, that's exactly what it means. It was, they submitted, they were, the draft or adopted was not in compliance. I'll say a couple things. Low compliance at this time is not out of the ordinary. The consequences I recognize are a little bit, there's a higher bar here. There's rezone timelines at play. There is enforcement actions we're starting to take, which we didn't have really that capacity and authority in the last cycle. But it's not out of the ordinary to have a lower compliance rate earlier in the process. You are all about 4 months in. We're still working through ABAG and SCAG right now, and they're about 1 to 2 to 3 years in. And so it's not anything positive. It's not a goal we want to set here, but I don't want to completely scare you guys. And also, hopefully I'm helping by saying, like, you can give us a call, you can email us, we can work with you. Another thing is that there's a lot of multi-jurisdictional housing elements that are coming in, which are immediately going to bring up maybe not the compliance rate, but the submittal rate, right? They're all coming in at once, which most of them are. I would say as far as the most common things that we're seeing when you're getting a findings letter, so you're found out of compliance, AFFH is a huge thing. I think the consultants and our resources hopefully have gone really good at the data analysis, but the AFFH programs, so essentially programs to address the data, still need some work, and that's very common finding across the state. AFFH programs do take a little bit of work, especially with us, and that's why I always recommend to work closely with us to get it right, and it takes a couple times. So AFFH programs, fair housing programs, they need to be tailored, geographically tailored. They need to be quantifiably tailored. They do vary by jurisdiction. There are a lot of samples out there now, and we can also help with those samples and programs, suggested programs. So that's the first one I would say. In the Valley, a second one would be, which is a little bit more unique from SCAG and ABAG. In the Valley, you're going to see a lot of findings around using specific plans and using sites that still need to be annexed or have not quite been annexed or about to get annexed. There's a whole process. There's a set of findings in the housing element for those types of sites that do need to be addressed. When are they going to be annexed? What is the process? What's the zoning? What's the timeline for specific plans? How large is the specific plan? Is the infrastructure there? Is it not there? Is the zoning there? All kinds of details that if you have those kind of issues, we can work through. So I would say the two biggest ones, AFFH, specific plan / annexation. We don't see it as much, but it's still a thing here in the Valley now, non-vacant sites. that's a statewide finding as well, across the state. You got non-vacant sites. The 6-cycle requirements around sites in general are much higher bar, and then non-vacant sites truly fall under that, as well as just a higher bar, more requirements there, more analysis that's needed. I would say those are the biggest things we're seeing is AFFH and sites in the Valley.
Okay, well, let's shift the conversation a little bit and kind of focus on a success story. Steve, Shafter, one of the few Valley jurisdictions to actually make the deadline. I'm hoping that in your deal with Satan, you were able to get more than just a housing element on time. The black magic that it took to accomplish that. Tell us about how you managed this.
Well, hello, everyone. Nice to be here. Yeah, I'm Steve Esselman. I'm the planning director for the city of Shafter. It's a little town about 12,000 or 20,000 rather, just above north of Bakersfield. You know, a lot of what has been said already is kind of what we followed. I did hire a consultant. I am a planning staff of 2 here in Shafter, myself and a senior planner. We do everything from counter planning all the way to general plan updates. So, I mean, we pretty much touch everything every day. You know, I'd say Shafter's unique in a few regards that helped us. One, we do have a lot of available land. So our sites inventory, we had a lot of open vacant parcels to choose from. We're also lucky in the sense that we have a very large landowner in town that is actually interested in developing housing to accommodate the jobs that are being generated by this same large landowner. So we were able to put those areas into our sites inventory. We're also already an economically depressed area. We are an AB 617 community. That's the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District's emissions reduction program. So we already have areas of significant segregation and poverty. And so, you know, kind of just building homes, modest homes, at the price point we're at here locally kind of meets your sort of moderate or lower than moderate housing needs. We're also lucky that we have 3 specific plan areas with 5,000 homes already entitled and in the books, but still vacant land that we could pull into our sites inventory. So a lot of it is, I'm not going to say Shafter was unique in any way. We were just kind of, there's a lot of luck of the geography that I had to work with. But what I will say is we did hire a consultant early as we could. Once we did get our first draft out to HCD, we did take full advantage of those technical assistance meetings with Paul McDougall. He was the one that was reviewing it for us. And so we had actually a standing meeting for about 3 months every 2 weeks to go over what we were working on with Paul, so that we had real-time feedback as we were working through our compliance letter, including a couple of informal emails where he gave us suggestions on language, where to go with, you know, what we should maybe, how we should sort of refine and tweak the language. To ultimately getting our final letter of compliance, and then working very quickly to get that through my planning commission and my council so that we could be compliant. I'm also lucky in the sense that as part of the housing element update, I knew right after the housing element update, I was going to go right into a general plan update. My general plan is over 20 years old. And so it was time to sort of revision how the city was going to develop. So I have been able to know that if I could get the 3-year deadline, I could do my rezoning as part of my greater general plan update analysis. Trying to see here, I was kind of looking through, you know, another thing about, you know, one of the areas of that of AFFH, we've already sort of prioritized resources within our area of high segregation and poverty. through my public works department. We're building new tanks, pumps, roads, schools. Well, not, the schools are building schools, but those are going into our areas of high segregation and poverty already. So again, kind of a product of lucky geography. We're already working on these things, and I was able to fold them into my housing element. I think it was just close coordination what got me across the finish line. Having good consultants behind me, working with me, helping me, because they knew I was a small staff, but also having HCD there and available, every 2 weeks for about 3 months, to slowly chisel away the things that were not compliant until we finally were compliant. And then moving quickly to get that thing signed off by my council and my planning commission. I don't know if how helpful that is for someone who doesn't necessarily share the kind of the luck of the draw that I had, but that's kind of how we did it. And
That's great. I mean, so no magic. It's just kind of.
No, and the biggest thing, the only thing I was really, from the perspective of my council and planning commission, the only thing I was told was there will be no inclusionary zoning. It should be incentivized, and it should be really driven by the market. And luckily, I kind of have a market where it's already at price points that kind of meet that money. I would have been driven out on a rail, to be quite honest, if I put any inclusionary zoning into my housing element. That was the only thing they said. Besides that, do what you need to do to be in compliance. And so it wasn't really any trick. It was just I had a lot of things going for me in my geography.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, and also following a lot of the advice that we've already heard here today. Start early and, kind of just work the plan, essentially, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I mean, and don't be afraid of HCD. Honestly, once I started connecting with a few of the HCD folks, regular folks just like you and me, they want to help. They want us in compliance, I think, as much as we want to be in compliance if we can. And just asking questions. Will this work? Will that work? Okay, how about this approach? Until finally you nail something down that works for you and for them. And then getting it through your planning commission and council and what I will say is, yeah, I'm actually been working through, now that I have a compliant housing element, working through my own sort of spreadsheet on implementation. And yeah, I may have to reach out to some new consultants here to help me get that all done. But luckily I've got, like I said, a lot of this can be done through my general plan update. I've already got a consultant on board for that. So hopefully I'm hoping to leverage some of that work as part of the general plan update.
Oh, very good. Okay, yeah, Michael.
All right, back to the compliance again. So, compliance means you've submitted by the deadline and you've gone through a couple of rounds of review from HCD and you've made those corrections. Is that the definition of compliance?
Compliance is defined as either your draft or your adopted has been certified as compliant by HCD. So I was looking up Shafter's, as Steve was talking, looking up kind of the review records, and it was 5 drafts before it was found in compliance. He went through 5 rounds of review.
Mm-hmm.
So like taking Shafter, for example, 5 rounds of review, finally got in that, finally got a draft that was compliant. He got a letter, I'm sure Steve got a letter saying your draft is in compliance, go ahead and adopt, start that process. When you adopt, submit it back to us to make sure the adopted is the same as the draft essentially, and that's compliant. He submitted the adopted and now he has compliance. So you have a situation, yeah, maybe if I can explain the difference. You have a situation where your draft is in compliance and now your next step is to go ahead and adopt so that you can resubmit and make sure you're fully in compliance. So you, at this point, if you have a draft in compliance, that's great, but that doesn't mean you're in compliance, if that makes sense, right? You still got to go ahead and adopt, because the 6th cycle started on the day of the first date of the 6th cycle, and that meant your 5th cycle was immediately out of compliance, right? Because the 6th cycle started. So until you have an adopted that's found in compliance by HCD, you are not in compliance. Great to have a draft in compliance though. That's your, like, you're almost there, that means. But to define it, that's how we define it, if that makes sense.
Okay, and so Shafter had theirs in, and they adopted by their council by the deadline?
If they adopted by the deadline and you had any rezones, that just means now you don't have to do your rezones in 1 year, you get 3 years.
Okay,
I think Shafter, you guys were in compliance by the deadline.
Yes, yeah, in
Okay.
fact, I mean, we really pushed to keep that 3 years because that married well with me going right into a general plan update where I'm going to create, make some changes to my land use map as well as, zoning, subsequent zoning based on that map. So I wanted the 3 years because that way it just worked very well with the general plan schedule, which is about a 2 to 3 year schedule. And so at the end, through the general plan update process, and then as part of my general plan update, I'm going to do a new zoning ordinance so that it's consistent with the general plan. I will be able to do the rezoning then. And so we really worked hard to be able to get the 3 year rather than the 1 year.
right.
But yeah, I think we got the compliance letter probably in January, and by March, I got it through the Planning Commission in February, and I got it through 2 reads of the ordinance in March. And then we had to upload a bunch of information to HCD, like the resolutions and things of that nature, so that they kind of gave them that final package so that they could give us not only the final compliant, I don't know how you would call it HCD, but basically you are really truly done letter. And in fact, there was another part where you had to make sure on the website that it said in compliance or something by a certain date. And then you were truly done and you were good to go.
That's great.
So-
And then how many months did the work on the housing element take?
We turned it in. We turned it in spring of 2023. By August, we got our first letter saying, here's how you're not in compliance. And that's when we started working on the bi-weekly
Okay,
meetings. Again, she said five drafts, 2 formal letters. 3 of those drafts were actually informal. And so we would continually get feedback from HCD as we were making our changes until we finally got a formal second letter saying you're not in compliance somewhere in the late November, early December, somewhere in there. Was finally able to push it across the finish line where Paul said, yeah, I think you guys are in compliance now. I'm feeling pretty good about it. You can start working on finalizing this. Get it to me. I can get you the letter, and then you can get to adopting your housing element.
So how many on average, do you have any idea how many drafts it's taking per, and particularly in the Valley, per jurisdiction?
In the Valley, we're still seeing about 3 to 5, but there are jurisdictions that are getting it at the 3 mark versus, which is really good because in ABAG and SCAG, they're more on the higher mark of the 5, on the higher end of the spectrum. So we are seeing in the Valley, some jurisdictions are coming in and getting it done by the 3rd mark. And maybe the extra not the extra submittal, but the 4th submittal is just the adopted the draft was already in compliance. So it's really just making sure the adopted was good to go. So about the 3 to 5 mark is the average across the state. In the valley, we're seeing it on the lower end. And in other parts of the state, we saw it on the higher end, sometimes up into the 6 and 7s. So, but I would plan for the 3 to 4 mark at least.
Very good. Ryan?
Yeah, I would just say that's consistent with what Mintier Harnish and Rincon experienced when working in the city of Lodi. We actually got a clean, substantial compliance letter after the initial 90-day review. But during that 90 days, we did 6 different rounds of edits with our reviewer. Luckily, we had Paul's ear as well, so we were able to meet with him regularly and get suggestions. But we actually did 6 informal reviews in that 90-day period, just, you know, responding to things, responding to the comments from Paul, asking for extra review of our programs, because that sometimes from HCD, the program comments come in late. They come in on like your second review. So we just asked for that up front. He really reviewed our programs, and we were able to work back and forth on a number of drafts in that 90 days. It's really rare that the HCD has that much time, so I wouldn't plan on it. But if you do, if your reviewer has that time, please use it.
All right.
Yeah, I think Paul just had some free time on his hands, you know, and he just was like, oh, what should I do? So he's just picking up people's housing elements.
But you never know when that's going to be. You can't count on it.
It is true. It is true. It's a little unpredictable.
Okay, so we only have a few minutes left, so I do want to leave some time for audience questions. I do see that we have one coming in from Matt Diaz. Considering HCD has 90 days for the first review and 60 days for each after, if it's taking 3 to 5 submittals, how is the jurisdiction going to get compliance in the near future? That would mean HCD is having the documents from 210 to 330 days.
Yeah, so the
The
90
informal-
days. Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
Formal review is the key there, right? I think that's what what Ryan and Steve and Sohab talked about, is that it may be 2 formal submittals where they've got that 90-day review and the 60-day review, but there may be additional rounds of review, quote unquote, that are happening during those informal reviews and those informal discussions. So I think that's where that number is coming from.
Yeah, I would say too, I mean, 90 days initial draft, our goal has always been, and it's getting better because things are starting to slow down in other parts of the state, is to get you within that 90 days or even within that 60 days, a preliminary set of informal comments within the review period. So Ryan was saying that within their first, with City of Lodi, within that 90-day initial draft period, Lodi did revisions, I think, would you say 7 times?
6, yeah.
7 times. And so the goal that we try to achieve, it is pending staff capacity. So I do want to flag that. But pending staff capacity and our workload, at times it fluctuates. At times we got everyone submitting at once. We have everyone in the state in our office. That happened. And so pending that capacity, though, the goal is that within that initial 90 days, you are getting a preliminary set of comments within the first 30 days to 45 days. You are getting an opportunity to cut that down as much as you can. In Ryan's case, 7 times, and cut it down all the way to a compliant draft. And even within that 60-day period, especially if you're coming in as a subsequent draft, adopted draft or adopted housing element that needs to make changes in that 60 days, but your letter or findings letter that you're addressing is pretty minimal or less, not a very long letter, then we're trying to prioritize you as well to make sure that, hey, there's only 5, 6 findings left. Let's see if we can get you across the finish line in that 60-day review as well. And that is also the goal, is submitting your housing elements and working with us to get that findings letter as short as possible, so that, you know, at the end, we're just down to a couple findings that we can both easily, the city and HCD can easily knock off together and get you across that finish line. So we're not, it's not sitting in our office for all the 60, 90 days, unless absolutely there have been times where we just have a lot of jurisdictions in line. Ideally, we are trying to get to you and get you some set of comments and set of revisions done within that period to get you as close to compliance as possible so you don't have to submit so many times.
There we go.
And I would just add to the commenter's kind of point, it does take a long time, especially if you don't have resolution, like findings in your resolution that staff can make edits to respond to any HCD comments for compliance. You'll take the 60 days, you'll get a letter, then you have to make your revisions, then you have to go back through adoption processes again, then you submit it again. If HCD has another comment, you start all over again. So that's why I'm saying get started early, you know, because yeah, the end of the project can really stretch out.
I would also just emphasize what Ryan just said. If you can, try as hard as you can to get those findings in your resolution. That gives staff authority to work with HCD and make changes after you've adopted. We've seen this across the state with so many jurisdictions where they'll have that authority in their adopted resolution, so we can continue to make modifications as necessary to bring that into adoption, into compliance. Otherwise, like Ryan said, you'll be in a continuous cycle. You've adopted, you're out of compliance, you got to go re-adopt now, found back in compliance. It's happened a handful of times where jurisdictions are adopting 2-3 times before they're found in compliance. So instead of doing that, either don't adopt and keep it as a draft until you get that draft in letter, or have authority in your resolution to make changes.
Okay, so we just very briefly, we were running out of time. Have a couple more comments. Mr. Diaz says we submitted 3 times within 11 months, with HCD having our document for about 6 months. This made 2023 compliance a non-starter. Just a comment there, following up on his earlier question. And then from Carl Davison, regarding annexations, how does HCD determine what a credible timeline is when there are so many variables, jurisdictions, LAFCO, calendars?
Sorry, regarding annexations, credible timeline, there's
How does the HCD
Sure.
determine what a credible timeline is when there are so many variables?
that one, I think it would be helpful to talk one-on-one, because like you just said, there are a lot of different variables. There are things we're looking at as well in terms of annexation. What RHNA income category you're looking at, the reliance you have on a site that needs to be annexed or land that needs to be annexed versus the rest of your inventory, what phase you are currently in this process of annexation, and what steps you have remaining. And so I would say that is something that it can vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction, case by case. I would just reach out to us and we can kind of talk through what your situation is and then what would be an appropriate timeline.
All right. So to summarize, start early if you can. That may be better advice for the next cycle. Don't be afraid to ask questions. HCD is there to help. Please reach out as often as necessary, and please take advantage of consultant services and technical assistance where you can find it from HCD or from the Valleywide REAP program. There are still opportunities within REAP. Though the program is beginning to wind down, there have been no further extensions, as you may know. So we are looking at ending the program by December 31st of this year. But in the meantime, don't fear the Reapers. Blue Oyster Cult counsels us, don't fear the Reapers. So with that, I'll hand it back to Michael to close us out. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you very much to our panelists.
Yep. Thank you to our fine moderator, our fine panelists for a very interesting discussion today. And thank you for all the attendees who dialed in. So we'll talk to you again soon in the near future. The next webinar probably will be in August of this year. So thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.